Good morning, everyone. I've just come out of a National Cabinet meeting this morning with the Prime Minister and the other Premiers. But firstly, before I answer any questions around that, I'd like to take you through the latest COVID numbers. We have no new local cases of COVID-19 in Western Australia. This is a very pleasing result. Overnight, we have one new case of COVID-19 related to a returned overseas traveller from India. The man in his 30s is in hotel quarantine in Perth. Yesterday we had 2,497 people vaccinated. This means we now have 96,508 people in WA who have had at least their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine via the state system. Since Friday, 53,623 people have been tested for COVID-19 in Western Australia. This is a great result. People have taken it seriously. But we need to keep the testing rates up. So if you're unwell, if you have been to any of the locations that have been published, that the COVID positive people went to, please get yourself tested. If you have been unwell and you get unwell again, please get yourself tested. It's critically important over the next week, as we're still in the incubation period where we haven't fully shaken off the virus yet, that the testing rates stay up. Tonight we snap back and the new rules come in at midnight tonight for the coming week, and they are the ones I announced last evening. Basically, it's about wearing a mask, it's about doing the right thing, it's about ensuring that you follow all the rules and precautions that we are putting in place. That will continue for a week. It is a big change on where we've been, but it is still some precautionary measures in place to keep ourselves safe, to ensure that whilst the incubation period, the 14-day incubation period is expiring, we continue to have strong and sensible measures in place to protect ourselves. Can I thank all West Australians for all of their efforts over the course of the last week. We have a week to go. I'm sure if we work together and do the right thing, we'll get through this. Do we have any questions?
Obviously, your National Cabinet, was the issue around hotel quarantine top of the agenda?
Look, I won't go into what's discussed at inside a Cabinet meeting, but clearly the Commonwealth knows our position. I wrote to the Prime Minister during the course of this week, in fact twice, about these matters. We'll be removing 3 hotels from our system of returning travellers. One of those will be converted to a seasonal worker hotel so that we can bring in seasonal workers from Tonga and Vanuatu. The Commonwealth is fully aware of our position. That will mean we reduce the number of returning travellers to Western Australia significantly. As of yesterday, our cap halved down to 512 returning Australians per week. Where we land and what our exact number we can take that we will advise the Commonwealth of, we'll do in the course of coming days, once we work out exactly what we can safely manage.
Premier, you said last night that the Commonwealth's argument that some of those facilities weren't appropriate, you said it just wasn't true, some of their arguments about shared bathrooms and such. Did you raise that with them today?
Look, as I said, I won't go into what's spoken about inside a Cabinet meeting. That wouldn't be appropriate to talk about those conversations. But all I'd say is that the Commonwealth does have facilities. They want to bring people home, as we all do, and it should be a joint effort.
You're standing by lockdowns as the preferred method when there are community cases?
Well, the best thing we can do is get vaccinated. So if we all get vaccinated as soon as possible, that would help. Lockdowns are a method that does help prevent spread of the virus very quickly, and it gets the matter over with as quickly as we possibly can. I know there's a lot of discussion out there around these things and what's the best option, but the West Australian model has been, we try and prevent the virus from coming in with borders. If we do have any spread of the virus, we try and kill it quickly. I think that's a far better model than allowing the virus to linger in the community. This has gone on now 14 months. We've learnt a lot of things. We've watched a lot of countries. We've seen what different states have done. The virus is insidious. Most countries have had no luck in keeping it out, and there's only really two countries in the world with significant populations that have been successful in crushing and killing the virus, and that's Australia and New Zealand. And most countries around the world are very envious of what Australia and New Zealand has done. In terms of crushing and killing it, Western Australia has basically done better than any other state in Australia because we used our isolation to advantage. And I don't want to give that away. I want us to continue down that pathway. The idea that we allow it to linger and we have ongoing lockdowns and ongoing measures that remove ordinary life for extended periods, I don't think is the right model. So I know there's been a lot of discussion about it. I know there's various commentators out there with various views. I just repeat to you all, the New South Wales Northern Beaches outbreak that took place, that went on for months. They had 3 months of measures put in place. It cost the New South Wales economy $3.2 billion. I'd far rather kill the virus quickly over the course of a long weekend rather than have 3 months of restrictions.
Premier, what do you think of, so the CBD at the moment is pretty quiet because a lot of the big corporations like Chevron and Woodside have made that decision to stay home because of the mask wearing. The cafes and so on are struggling. I mean, what would you say to those big companies? Should they be telling their people to go back to their offices and wear masks, or is it okay for another week of them not wearing it?
Well, the advice we've given to people is you can return to work and that you can do so and wear a mask. I'm sitting in my office wearing a mask. I know it's not perfect, but it's not the biggest of impediments to doing your job. So we've advised people that you can go back to work. I'd certainly encourage people to go back to work. Wearing a mask is not that difficult.
Premier, if people can social distance in their office, say you're sitting in your office by yourself, why is it mandatory they must wear a mask? Could it not be wear a mask if you can't social distance in the office? Because
you're indoors. So we've been through this for 14 months. Indoors is different to outdoors. Crowds are different to areas where there's sparse populations. But because you're indoors, the prospect of the virus travelling is far greater. So we've learnt that in hotel quarantine. In confined spaces, the virus can travel. So that's why we insist that in workplaces, in other public places, in anywhere indoors apart from the home, you need to wear a mask.
Premier, the Chamber of Commerce and Industry have done a survey estimating the cost of the lockdown to be $170 million. It shows the average expected impact on a business across the 7 days is just under $27,000. They're calling on the proposed relief to go further than the $2,000. Would that be considered by the state government? No,
we've announced what our plan is. We'll work out a strategy. It'll be basically $2,000 of support for businesses that demonstrate that they've suffered a loss, and we'll work out the exact guidelines and parameters in coming days. $27,000 grants to every business is not feasible and not viable, and is excessive. But certainly a $2,000 grant to affected businesses, particularly small businesses, your cafes, hospitality, your cinemas, those sorts of businesses that definitely suffered a loss, I think is fair and reasonable.
But then on the lockdown issue, Stephanie just talked about 27,000, and Gary says that the Chevron and other bigger companies are not still working from home at this point. Isn't it true that the real impact of lockdown lasts the whole week? So therefore, it should have to be more than $2,000 if that's actually going to help small businesses.
No. So Melbourne had, from memory, a 5-day lockdown, and their grants were around $2,000. When Sydney had their lockdowns, they went on for months. Their grant was $3,000. Ours is much shorter, and therefore we think it's a fair process. It's based upon businesses that actually suffered a loss.
Premier, what happens if there's another community case detected tomorrow?
Well, it depends on circumstances. So what we might find is that there are additional community cases that become apparent within people who are quarantining. So we have hundreds of people literally quarantining at this point in time who were close contacts. So if we get a case out of one of those people, well, obviously it's very different to discovering cases in the broader community. So what you find with COVID, you can't set hard and fast rules. You judge each and every circumstance on its merits, which is what we've done, but we've always taken a very, very cautious approach.
The AHA-WA, it's obviously their members who suffer the most when these lockdowns happen. They say it was ridiculous to lock down 2 million people just for a couple of cases, and that the New South Wales hotspot approach has been proven to work. Why won't you even attempt to adopt that model so that there's not 2 million people locked up over 2 cases?
Look, I just don't agree with their logic. We have the strongest economy in the nation. We're the only economy that didn't go into recession. We have the strongest employment growth, the strongest economic growth, best financial management, strongest retail and strongest hospitality. And that's because we crush and kill the virus. New South Wales, I'll repeat to you again, the northern suburbs outbreak. When they had the northern suburbs outbreak, it started with a few cases, and then because they didn't crush and kill it, it grew to 150 cases around New South Wales. The rolling lockdowns went on for 3 months. 3 months. It cost their economy $3.2 billion. Now that's around 30 to 50 times what we've done. So the idea that somehow there's some magical New South Wales solution doesn't bear analysis, because it's not right. And as you might recall, and a lot of information flows in about COVID all over the world, but as you might recall, they actually locked down the northern beaches, then they locked down part of the northern beaches, then they had numerous people in isolation for Christmas, and then it broke out in other parts of the state, and they locked down other parts of the state. All of the measures went on for 3 months. Now, I'd prefer to have the whole thing over in a fortnight, if we possibly can, with 3 difficult days in that period, rather than 3 months of rolling lockdowns and billions of dollars of cost.
What about?
So when they say these things, Peter, when they say these things, it's not borne out by the facts. It's not borne out by fact. And I think sometimes, you know, there's a sort of in particular, a group of commentators in Sydney who just think New South Wales can do no wrong. And so they just portray this New South Wales model is always the best. Most of them probably don't know anything about Western Australia, probably haven't been here, and they don't look at the facts.
The lockdown, both lockdowns probably could have been avoided if warnings that were given to their health department, 1, face masks for security guards, 2, empty rooms near positive cases in high-risk hotels. Those warnings had been acted on earlier. This whole thing could have been avoided twice. Are you going to make any personnel changes at SHIC to ensure that it's a better run system that reduces the risk?
Well, in the first case, the hotel security guards were following medical advice. I didn't know, and no one knew, as far as I'm aware. And sorry, I'll put it this way: the security guard was following the rules that were in place. Obviously, the rules changed subsequent to the virus getting out of a room and into a corridor. On this occasion, the virus went through one room, across a corridor, through another door, and into another room. Now, at the point in time that occurred, obviously we've now decided to phase out those hotels. But at the point in time it occurred, it was basically around the time we're getting ventilation reports about these things. And the advice that the medical people have provided us is that that the situation could be managed in those hotels with changes. Now, look, the system isn't perfect. We've had 2 incidents out of 45,000 people transit through our hotels. 2 incidents, you know, we do our best in difficult circumstances. In terms of people, I know that people move through health into different roles at different points in time. That's all managed by the health department.
There was another, there was another 3 hotels that were requisitioned last year for hotel quarantine that were in use. They were the Tradewinds, Crown and Duxton. Are you going to bring them back on so that you can increase the cap of arrivals?
We'll have a look at, so we're doing a full review on what is available and what's out there. But I'm not going to take on hotels that have any of these areas of elevated risk. You know, the virus can basically, it appears, it can aerosol, and it can travel through doors and across corridors and into other doors because of ventilation systems that might be 30 years old. So if there's elevated risk in the same way as there has been in the 4 Points, the Mercure and the Novotel Langley, I'm not going to bring them on. So that means a reduced cap. So that means fewer people returning through Perth from overseas. And that's very difficult and no doubt sad for some of those people who have gone overseas. But I'm not going to adopt that risk in the future.
Premier, you're a Dockers fan. Would you feel safe getting on a train and sitting at the footy with 45,000 other people on Sunday?
Yes, I would, if I wore a mask and adopted the rules, which I'd encourage everyone to do. I'm not actually going to the game. For some reason, my kids don't want to go with me, but I've asked at length. So I'm not actually going to the game. But if I was, I'd wear a mask and follow the rules.
On the $2,000, sorry, on the $2,000 grants again, will it be across small businesses or just specific industries?
The details have been worked out, but it'll be particularly those industries that have been affected. As I said, hospitality, I think I've got a list here, it would be cafes, restaurants, catering, pubs, taverns, bars, specialised food retailing, as I said, cinemas, creative, hairdressing. There's a range of industries, a range of businesses that have been impacted. We'll work out the guidelines and details. Hopefully I'll be able to announce something on that in the coming week.
There's been quite a few businesses, particularly on radio this morning, saying they're losing thousands of dollars with your decision to lock us down. What do you say to them? And their complaints are that you're still pocketing your wage. What do you say to them in that instance?
Oh, I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry that this occurred. Obviously, bringing back returning Australians creates risk, and the hotel system we have in place was never built for these purposes. The reports we had said they could continue to be used if mitigation was put in place. We've continued to put in place mitigation in our hotels, but I'm going to reduce the risk by removing 3 hotels, and that means that there'll be fewer Australians able to return through Perth. Obviously, we've had grave concerns about Australians leaving Australia and going to COVID hotspots for a long period of time. And we've raised those concerns with the Commonwealth. But I'm very sorry it's happened to small businesses. The most important thing we can do is snap back as quickly as possible, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Just on that issue of Australians being permitted to travel to COVID hotspots and come back in again, sometimes with the virus, you raise it again in Parliament. Do you have any figures that back up on how many Australians have been permitted to travel to COVID hotspots like India and then come back into the country?
The latest advice I've been given is that in the first 3 months of this year, 4,500 Australians went to India. 4,500 for various reasons. Now, I don't know how many have gone in the last month, and the Commonwealth clamped down on that on, I think it was the 22nd of April. So in the time from March 30 to the 22nd of April, who knows, there might have been another 1,000. It's a large number, and I'm advised there's 9,000 Australians wanting to come home from India. So on the basis of my maths, that's at least half of the people in India wanting to come home have probably gone there recently. Now, clearly that's a big mistake, and clearly that's put our system under pressure, and clearly I'm pleased, as I said to the Commonwealth weeks ago, that they've clamped down on people leaving Australia and going to India. I'm also pleased that you know, well, I'm hopeful people have got that message that they shouldn't have gone, but 4,500 in the first 3 months of this year is a lot. On that subject, I'd like to see a bit of a national effort to help India. We as a country have close relationship with India, helping with whether it's oxygen, whether it's masks, whether it's financial support. I think nationally we should do that. I think all governments across the country should do it. I certainly will. We're certainly working on what we can do at the moment. It's a catastrophe, a human catastrophe going on in India, and we have many Indian Australian families with family members in India as we speak. and I want to make sure that the West Australian government helps, and I'd urge anyone who wants to help to think about ways of donating to charities or what it might be that can help with India. But certainly in terms of providing either financial support or excess PPE we might have or oxygen we might have to India, we're working up options as we speak so we can assist our great friends in India.
Premier, just on another matter, if everyone's all right with that, just a justice matter, there was a case on radio this morning, and I know that Nick Graham was on complaining that under your High Risk Offenders Act, there's a person at the moment who has just been released from prison. The state want him with an electronic tracker put on him as part of the conditions of his release. But the Chief Justice has said, well, I'll make that decision in 3 weeks, and in the meantime, the guy's out in the community without the electronic tracker. Is that good enough?
I don't know any details, I'm sorry, Gary.
I mean, that obviously act was brought in to try and make sure that even those dangerous, high-risk offenders get some sort of measures while they're out in the community, but he's just free. I
don't know the details, and I'm always a bit sceptical about what some members of Parliament allege. But all I'd say is the High Risk Offenders Board was brought in as a much tougher measure than what was there before. So what was there before was no supervision, nothing. So when we brought in the High Risk Offenders Board, and indeed when we brought in the dangerous sex offender laws last time we were in government, it was designed to put in place measures to either keep people in prison beyond the end of their sentence if they were at high risk of reoffending, or to ensure that there was stronger supervision when they were released at the end of their sentence. So the laws that were put in place have significantly toughened the situation. What the circumstance is with that individual, I don't know.
Just on electoral reform, Premier, you said repeatedly throughout your campaign that electoral reform wasn't on your agenda. It seems you haven't wasted much time getting straight into it with the expert committee that was announced. What's changed?
Well, the Daylight Saving Party getting someone elected with 98 votes, whilst in the South Metropolitan region, the Liberal Party got 67,000 votes and got one person elected. So the system clearly has significant flaws, and obviously we need to review what needs to happen. So I think everyone would think that is not fair. One person gets elected with 98 votes, another person gets elected with 67,000 votes. That's not fair. It's clearly not fair. In any system in the entire world, that would be regarded as unfair. So we have commissioned Malcolm McCusker, former Governor of Western Australia, combined with some experts in the field to examine the system. They've been given 8 weeks to have a look and see what can and should be done.
Do you still want to keep some form of proportional representation?
What I said before the state election was we'd have enhanced regional representation. That commitment stands.
Why couldn't you be more upfront with the public? I lost count of the number of times I asked you about electoral reform and it was never on your agenda. I mean, isn't this another example of why the public can't trust politicians?
Well, I didn't know the Daylight Saving Party was going to get elected with 98 votes. I'm not a mind reader, not Nostradamus. They got elected with 98 votes, one MP. Other MPs didn't get elected with tens of thousands of votes, or other people didn't get elected with tens of thousands of votes. That shows the system has significant flaws. And as I said after the election, I asked John Quigley to look at it. He's come up with an eminent West Australian to have a look at the system. I think that's a good way forward.
Premier, just back to the $2,000 grant, if that's okay. Will regional businesses who have been impacted, loss of travellers from Perth and whatnot, will they also be considered for that grant?
Well, that's something we're working on. It's predominantly Perth and Peel, obviously, but we'll have a look at that. We haven't made a final decision on that. You can't make it. You've got to have some rules around these things. It is public money, so we'll look at what rules we put around it.
Back on electoral reform, it's obviously very politically useful for you to point the finger at the situation with the Daylight Saving Party, but that's a group voting ticket issue. You're, in this review, conflating it with proportional representation. Why not just deal with group voting ticket and leave proportional representation as it is?
I think the whole system needs to be looked at. clearly. I didn't even know this, but a vote in Kalgoorlie is worth 3.5 times a vote in Albany. I didn't know that, and I don't know if anyone would think that's fair. So we'll have a look at all these things. Malcolm McCusker is the right person to do it.
Right, thanks everyone.
Thank you.